We're rocking and rolling here at Woodstock Access TV, and welcome to Conant Show. I think this is Conant Show 31. 31 weeks. That's discipline for you, huh? I can't even imagine doing a daily show, because keeping up with the once a week is challenging enough. So there's a lot on my mind, as always, and I had a impromptu invitation this afternoon to come on Steve Romine's Truth Squad with Rudy, and do you remember Rudy's name?
I can't remember his last name. Famous Rudy, the firefighter.
Rudy, the famous firefighter from 9/11, one of the first responders there, and he was part of that fire department that lost 340 plus people.
Maybe Rudy Dent.
Could be Rudy Dent.
Yeah.
Lovely man, by the way, very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And so we got to talking about when I entered the conversation, about a half hour left in their show. I kind of had to play catch up a little bit, and then so the question became, well, what do you remember about 9/11? What was your impressions at the very beginning? And so I told a little bit of my story, and about it took me, just a matter of seconds to conclude that, having watched live on TV the building number 2, World Trade Center 2, coming down in its own footprint in a matter of seconds, I turned to my then partner Carol and said, "Controlled demolition." And she goes, "What?" And I said it was controlled. That was controlled demolition. And she said, "Well, what's that mean? What are you talking about?" And what I'm saying is that it wasn't an airplane that just took that building down. That was done. There's only so many corporations, maybe 6 or 8 of them in the world, that have the expertise and qualifications to demolish a superstructure like the World Trade Center in its own footprint. And so, me just being a solo act builder, brick and mortar and wood and stone kind of construction dude, could figure out in a matter of seconds, watching what I was watching, that it was a controlled demolition. And that started me on my, journey down the rabbit hole, so to speak, into the 9/11 truth and surrounding issues. I also forgot to mention my thanks and gratitude to Paula Gloria Barton for teching for me, and makes my life a lot easier here in front of the camera. So as the conversation evolved, I got the opportunity to ask Rudy today if he could verify 2 things really for me. One was, I had met a Mohawk iron worker, high steel iron worker, who, among many of his colleagues, were moved to return to the World Trade Center and go through the debris looking for human remains, because these guys had a big hand in building the World Trade Center through the 60s and 70s. And I got to talking to him, total by chance. I didn't know the man. He was going south, I was going south, and he was going back home north, and we just happened to be having coffee at the Millbrook Diner over there in Millbrook, New York. And he told me then 2 things that were quite remarkable. One is that there was no physical object, no matter what material, whether it was computer, plastic, metal, glass, wood, concrete, nothing was bigger than a quarter. And most everything else was dust, was powder. And this is more than 95 5% of the building had been reduced to this very, very fine particulate ash-like powder. And the Mohawk iron worker I had been talking to was just shaking his head going, what could do that? He said, he's a builder too, and he's a builder of high steel, and he couldn't wrap his brain around what kind of energy was used to pulverize a superstructure of that magnitude to a pile of dust and molten metal. That was the other phenomenon that I first encountered that piece of information, that the first responders and the guys helping out with looking for human remains were walking on this debris field with molten steel, molten metals down below in the crater where the debris fell into. See, that's another aspect of this that I didn't get to ask Rudy because of the time constraint, but I am told that he'll be coming back, and I'll be able to do another show perhaps with him at a future date. So then we got to talking about that, and he verified, yes, in fact, the building had been pulverized, just pulverized he said he described it as talcum powder. And that I was correct in my memory about what was the size of the largest pieces of debris were no bigger than a quarter, size of a money quarter, very small. And then I got another shot to ask him a question about a phenomenon that I had seen a lot of YouTube videos about, and some photo stills of automobiles and trucks that were incinerated on one part of the vehicle, and the other part of the vehicle seemingly untouched. And in some of these photographs, entire engine blocks were vaporized. And again, this kind of phenomenon associated with a controlled demolition is really unprecedented. We can't ascertain how jet fuel from a single jet airliner can not only demolish a superstructure 110 stories high into its own footprint in a crater of molten metal, and additionally cause a heat phenomenon that would vaporize engine blocks and the half of a vehicle, but leave the other half of the vehicle unscathed, untouched. And Rudy verified that as well. He couldn't speak to the vaporized engines, the internal parts having been missing, but what he did see, the vehicles on the street, that half of the vehicle being more or less intact and normal, and the other half being incinerated. And he was a firefighter. He was also a policeman. He's a very smart fellow, and acquainted with military experience, also a Vietnam vet. And so he's acquainted with some of the exotic weaponry that does exist, and he could not explain in conventional terms what could possibly do that to an automobile unless there was some kind of plasma energy, plasma field. And for those of you who aren't technically savvy, I apologize, but I don't have better language to simplify some of these ideas.
Did he say plasma?
I said plasma, and he agreed.
Yeah, he's also a fire marshal that is an expert witness.
Yes, he's a fire marshal and expert witness. This is part of his qualifications. And so this brings me to today. I once again am remiss in finding a guest to interview or have on and talk about stuff. So you guys put up with me again, folks. But I have loaded onto a little thumb drive a series of my photography that is examples of unconventional aircraft doing something in the atmosphere. And you can see on screen now. All right, slow down. Don't go so fast. Let's start with that one. That's fine. We can just go through one of the, this will give me something to bounce off of. All right, what we're seeing here is not a helicopter. It is not a conventional jet of any kind I have ever seen. To me, it simply looks like two kind of rectangular cube-like objects connected, divided but connected with pipes coming off of it, and a contrail or chemtrail coming off of it. Now that's an extreme blow-up. Then I took this photograph when I was doing a lot of research about what's in the atmosphere and going on in our atmosphere, relative to geoengineering, or a concept called chemtrailing, which is to modify the atmosphere. Yeah, you can do a blow up, get right in on it, and that's the same one. And now, what I want to really impress upon you out there looking at this is that this object was very high, and I took it with a conventional Konica 35 millimeter film camera. And this would go back to 2005, 2006, 2007. And then my camera was stolen with my 800 power zoom lens on it. So this capture here is not only zoomed all the way on the camera, but I had to zoom it on my computer to really kind of bring up some of the detail. I call it a gravity drive craft. There's no engine. Those are not engines on it. There's no wings. Okay, now here is the same object canted and turned to a different position without a chemtrail coming off of it. It's done its load, and now you can really get some detail. This is an incredibly important photograph, folks. These are non-conventional aircraft that do not have wings as we know them. It does not have a rotor. It does not make a sound. I call them gravity drive. This is my photography. I'm standing on it. It's not a Photoshop. This is my word of honor. I'm telling you the truth. This is the kind of stuff that's up there in the sky today. Now, here's another one. Again, it's from a different vantage point, and it's a different type of device. And now, if I had a shaky hand, if you're going to try to tell me that this is just a regular airplane, the graininess that you see is the actual grain of the print and the film. That's because I had to blow it up. But even with so much magnification, you can see quite a bit of detail in this object. And the chemtrails coming off of the distribution device, the nozzles, if you will, are very, very clearly delineated. This is not a shaky hand. It's not a blurfo. This is an object very high up in the sky, a lot of magnification, and I'm doing these shots handheld with a conventional 35 millimeter camera. All right, now this is a sort of a compilation of a variety of objects in the sky that I had taken over Woodstock one day. I call it the fleet. Now these are very fast-moving objects, and by this time I had probably 1,000 hours of photography, still photography, shooting objects moving in the sky by hand. Okay, folks, let me tell you, to get an object moving very fast through the sky by hand with just a shutter speed to capture the image is a lot of skill, and I developed quite a steady hand over the time to get those images. Now I want to connect these photographs, this evidence of high technology, very advanced technology that is now present in our world. I'm not going to say definitively what they are or who made them. Are they Ruskies? Are they Chinese? Are they American? Or are they off-worlders? Another planet, alien technology. As far as I'm concerned, it could be any of the above. And the reason I say that, I have my own personal experiences, but the reason I say that is that if we look at our ancient history on the planet, which more and more people are really taking a deeper interest in places like Sumeria or the very ancient South Africa, in the mining debris fields of mines for iron and variety gold and diamonds, and South Africa is actually very mineral rich. These mining camps are 500,000 years old, 500,000 years old or more, and they are famous for what they call the ringing stones. And this particular outcropping of rock in South Africa has a tonal quality about them that if you take any of these stones and you pick them up off the ground and you hit them with a mallet, they ring like a bell. Well, it turns out that these tonally sensitive or tonally these stones that have these tonal qualities, when they are resonance, but it's a very, very unusual resonance, and you can make musical instruments out of them. I mean, they're quite beautiful. They call them bell stones. They find that there's huge constructions of concentric circles and radiating circles and circles around circles, and they were trying to almost like sheep fences in the way that these rocks are piled together. Maybe 3-4 feet high, 3-4 feet wide. But they're in circles, and they cover vast areas, and so a couple of researchers a few years ago went with magnometers and gravity measuring devices. I don't know what those are called, and found very, very profound disturbances to the Earth's magnetic field in the center of any given circle, and in these groups of circles, it was very intense. The theory became that whatever was being mined there was being offloaded to a craft, a mothership of some kind, and the planet was being mined, and the ore or the ingots or whatever it was that was deliverable was levitated, and that this phenomenal property of these rocks in these concentric circles were part of the device to transport these things. Just the pyramids in Giza, more ancient technology that our best guys today can't figure out how they did it. So what I came to a few years ago in what I call thought experiment, which I do a lot. Some people may call it meditating, but I was thinking about how we take for granted life. We're alive. We get to play with cell phones now, right? We get to drive cars. We get to burn fuel and we get to set rockets off and all this kind of neat stuff. And we got TV cameras, since I'm looking at one, and I started thinking, well, what made us? What made, why are we here? And all that kind of thing. And then I had this awesomely frightening thought come into my head. And it goes like this. We assume that life started because we were told by, our earth science books when we were kids, that there was this primordial soup in the ancient oceans of Earth. And in this primordial soup of bacteria and stuff, little slimy creatures crawled out onto the land. and they evolved into, more complex creatures, and plants did the same thing, and there's this evolutionary accident happened on Earth because Earth just happens to be in the Goldilocks zone, relative to the distance to our sun, our star. And it taking, millions and billions of years to eventually come to us with nuclear weapons capable of destroying the whole planet. It's a very logical, sequence to think about. But is it really random? Is it really an organic process that just happened to happen because the right, electrons slammed into the right neutrons, and that bounced off onto the right proton to, fuse this atom with that atom and make a molecule that resembles a building block of a life molecule? That's the theory we were all brought up with. Well, the theory that got dumped into my head randomly one day, a couple years ago, was, says who? Says who? Says, why does it have to be that way? Maybe machine intelligence came first. Maybe organic intelligence didn't come first to make machinery. Maybe it was machines that evolved first, and the thought progressed. It had its own train, and the thought went to reasoning it this way. Gosh. I have to ignore this, so I'm sorry, folks. Hello? Yes, who's this? Yes. I'm on a TV show right now. Can you call me back in a little while? Thanks. All right, bye. Okay, so sorry about that, folks. Now, the idea is our computers run on a language. That language is binary. And binary is either on or off, zeros or ones. Very simple. So it's all, it doesn't matter how complex the number. Whatever it is, like the image on the screen that you're seeing now is digitized. So it's all zeros and ones. Everything is a code of zeros and ones when it gets right down to this binary language. All right? And so the thought progressed to, well, maybe it's a lot easier for this phenomena of self-assembly, because that's what we're talking about in the primordial soup, right, is self-assembly. We're talking about atoms attracted to each other and then making molecules that then form life. It could just as easily be that machine intelligence started with atoms attracted to each other because of an electrical field phenomenon, which now the electric universe model allows for this idea in a way. But the point is that self-assembly does happen out in nature, and self-assembly of a machine is much more rudimentary than self-assembly of a complex living organism. And the thought progressed that maybe there was this perhaps silica life form or machine form that wanted to express itself and its intelligence as a living thing, and that it started to design the molecule for life. And that actually it was the machine that preceded the living organism. All right. Now this is a great photograph that has just been put in queue. And this photograph demonstrates one of my very early attempts at using Photoshop to draw a drawing. I'm really a traditional painter, but this is a craft as I remember it that I encountered as a small child in 1963. And I was taken aboard the craft, and it was explained to me that it was a living machine, okay, and that it seemed very lifelike to me. It had these tentacles, or these almost like jointed, segmented sea urchin tentacles, or spines, or legs of a spider even, that went around the craft in a radial pattern around the center of it. And at the very bottom, it was much like a flower pot, even with an aperture, with a hole. And that's where I was brought in through the bottom of the craft into the what I call the storage bay, where I was met by beings, and had a long meeting with them. But part of the meeting was that their technology incorporated machine, plant, and animal tissues all together, and that they had a living craft, and that living craft was computer driven, and also all of the communications on board the craft were telepathic, and that the pilots had a very, very interesting console, and I was witness to pilots changing out, like changing of the guard, so to speak, and there was these depressions where their hands had 3 fingers and a thumb, and they could put it right into these depressions on the console, much like this table, and I could see the pilot sort of lean back and adjust to the feeling that he was having, and I could see like a fiber optic connections going into his fingertips from the console that he put his hands into. Now, I don't want to digress into that story. I've told it before on my show, but the point that I'm making is that I was observing very, very advanced technology, and it was explained to me that these living craft. All right, that's good. Now you moved on to that. These living craft actually, the pilot and the craft work together with their minds. So there's a whole relationship with the craft itself. All right, going back, I want to go back to that thing. So these 2 pictures here, the little object in the lower portion of the photo of the image there is what I call a gravity drive sprayer tube, and the other object is an airplane. That's a conventional airplane coming in for a landing, and the property is in Falls Village, and I happened to be, standing in the yard talking to my friends there, and this was during a period when I always had my camera, and I thought these 2 objects were going to collide. All right, and I captured a picture of them, where the plane coming in for an approach to landing at Bradley International Airport near Hartford nearly collided with this very silent other object, which is in the blow up above. And as you can see, here we have a tube with tubes coming off of it. It looks like to me a nozzle, but there's no jet engines, there's no windows, there's no conventional tail or anything. It's just a tube with tubes coming off of it. And there's a lot of these things. And the reason I'm kind of going on about this tonight is I'm really trying to grab your attention, folks, that we are living in a very, how shall I say this, regulated consciousness. All right, we take for granted again this development of technology from the horse and buggy to the moon. All right, we just accept it. All right, we accept that we have air conditioning. We accept that we have, I don't know, smart cards, smartphones, smart bombs. We have all of this computational energy, computational power that is now being integrated with all of our machinery. And I'd like you to go back to that other one. All right, now that image there is out of a blow up of something that I saw in the clouds, and this image I enhanced with my Photoshop program, not to change the image, but to highlight and to what's the word, contrast, and to bring out something that was very unusual in my mind. And some people call them cloud ships. I don't know. It could have just been an artifact, but there it is, folks. It's an odd-looking thing. To me, it looks like some kind of a craft that's been cloaked. But there it is. You want to move on to the next one? All right. Now, looks like an airplane. Where's the engines? And what kind of wing is that? If you look at this is a chemtrailing device. You would think that, it's just really high up. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't that high up. And that's part of the reason why I was able to get so much clarity on something I didn't have to blow up a whole lot to get to see it. This plane here is, I'm calling it a plane for lack of a better word, is maybe 20 feet long. Not much bigger than a Cessna. It's a drone, but it's silent and there's no engines that you can visibly see. When you have two trails coming off of a conventional airplane, generally you will be able to see the tail section. In the tail section, like on a 727, you'll have two engines mounted, or even three, with the tail section sort of built around the engines. All right. In this photograph, we don't see the tail section. There's no wings and tail on the tail section here. So this is not a conventional aircraft. I would like to if there's any aircraft people out there that know their planes, tell me what that is. 679-7777. Sure, 679-7777. You can call in and we can talk about it. All right, moving on to the next image. This is perhaps one of the most remarkable photos I've ever taken. And the reason why it's so important is that it was an intuitive shot. I was going around Mudge Pond. It's a nice little road that goes around, that circumvents the whole pond. And I always had my camera with me. And I noticed a little tinkling way up high in the sky. It was a really clear day, a couple of puffy clouds around. And it was a glint, just a little glint, like a reflection that I saw way up high. So I stopped the car, I grabbed my camera, and I aimed in the general direction. I started snapping, and the glint happened again, and I managed to catch this image. And what's interesting is it's not symmetrical. Okay, it is not a symmetrical thing. Now, when you're looking at frequently like a hoax photograph of a hoax UFO, you can often find a hoax by the fact that it's too clear, it's too clean, and it's too symmetrical. When you're really dealing with a true gravity drive vehicle, there should be difficulties in getting that kind of precision. It should be hard to focus, and it should not be symmetrical. The reason is because they're bending gravity, they're bending light with the kind of technology that's involved. So if you notice the white part, one friend of mine, a kind of scientist dude, said, that looks to be like a coronal discharge, he called it. Some kind of electrical field coronal discharge. And it's not symmetrically directly under the main body of the craft. And it's not symmetrical, and it's distorted. And that's one of the hallmarks of a legitimate UFO or gravity drive photograph. So I'm going on about all of this because we are now being subjected to probably the most intense assault on our living tissue the world has ever seen. And it's silent, and it's insidious, and it's deadly. And we get to pay for it with our taxes and with our service fees for our phones and everything. It's this, our internet connection, all this Wi-Fi. You know, all of you out there that use a microwave oven, that stuff isn't safe. Look what it does to the food. It boils it in seconds. I got to tell you something. Well, all the cell phone towers that are already existing can easily transmit those kinds of radiations that can cook your flesh. Now, and as well as any other frequency that they want to dial up. It's really just a matter of dialing it up and then broadcasting this stuff, pumping it out. As I've been studying this thing called 5G and the 5G rollout,
Moments ago, I was
the
people who came to attend the meeting and have concerns about
impetus
radiation and
by the FCC and whatever it is, whatever the entity it is that they are representing,
told the guy
is
who showed
to
me the t-shirt
saturate,
posted as
not just like
enforcement
provide
order,
coverage,
confiscated
but
my
saturate
issue ID.
all
Is this
of North
consistent with
America.
the discussion
Probably
about
all of the world, but
what's the
specifically
actual
right now,
transaction?
North America and the United States specifically, and perhaps Canada, to such an extent that there will be nowhere to go. You will not have anywhere to go and not be saturated in these high-frequency broadcasts, emissions, weapons. And, you know, you might be out there thinking, wow, George has gone off the beam here. He's really, you know, who would do such a thing? Well, go back to 9/11 and think, well, who would drop these buildings in their footprint? What kind of intelligence failure would have to happen if it really was an outside job and not an inside job? Then we get to talk about, well, yeah, let's talk about 9/11 and what vaporized those buildings, what pulverized those buildings. What, you know, was it just thermite, you know, which melted the beams and caused an implosion, and then the word implosion implies that it was not an explosion, but something more unconventional. You know, in order for these structures to fall into their own footprint, something had to happen below ground, you see. Something had to excavate below ground for all of that material to go into. Otherwise, it would have gone much further out. The debris field would have been, if it was like, say, a conventional explosion, it will have...
But I thought the dust went into other counties.
I
I know you have a phone call.
the dust is dust. The wind blew it all over the place. But we're talking about on that the event itself. In that moment, we're 110 stories of concrete, glass, steel frame all had to go somewhere. And they're talking more than 90% of the mass of the building is missing. Where did it go? And how did that hole underneath the building, where it all ultimately went, what was left of it anyway, was excavated by an unknown phenomenon that removes material vaporized it, something, don't know what it did to that material, so that their other material, largely molten steel, had a place to go. And that's what kept the building in its footprint. The World Trade Centers were huge. These were monstrous buildings, brought down in their own footprint. Just try to think about that for a moment. And the depth of deception that's been perpetrated upon our mass consciousness and individual consciousness. You know, are we going to accept that a couple thousand gallons of kerosene, which is what jet fuel basically is going to satisfy an explanation for all of the phenomena associated with what, by any reasonable person's estimate, is a controlled demolition? A controlled demolition with exotic demolition tools and advanced technology. It's here. The future is here now. And you know, I kind of woke up in a very, very strange place, because I know that this massive infrastructure build of microwave 5G microwave technology is a weapon. It's a weaponized program, and
A weaponized service.
yeah, a weaponized service. And do we really even need it? I mean, are we so addicted to our Wi-Fi that we have to have it in canyons and on mountains and in valleys? Or is this something very different than what we're being sold, as what we're being told and sold? And this brings me to something my father said about World War II and about the Holocaust, the killing machine. And this is kind of gruesome and it's not a fun thought, but I'm going to tell you anyway. He said, there's no problem in killing lots of people. You can kill millions of people. The problem is getting rid of the bodies. What do you do with it? And that was probably the biggest problem, technical problem, not technical even, logistical problem for the Germans in World War II, was what to do with all the bodies. They were, you know, stacking corpses like cordwood and burning them and burying them. But you run out of time, you run out of space in burying them, and you know, and incinerators, you know, take time to burn them, and they got a war raging at a certain point. So that was the problem. So what they figured out is that, well, then just don't kill them all right away. What you do is you kill some of them so that the other ones can do the job of dispensing with the corpses. And then, you know, just follow that through as a program until eventually the last one's, you know, burying himself, you know, in a way. So if we're all coming down with, you know, microwave enhanced cancers, then we're going to die slowly, and our insurance is going to pay for it. Our estates get dissolved. The corporations absorb our wealth and our health. And then we end up, you know, either in a funeral pyre or in a pine box in the ground. Because that's the problem that the powers that be, or any tyranny, always has. If you want to kill millions of people, you can do it, but then you're left with the problem of dispensing with the corpses. And here is an orgone generator. And this is one of the smaller ones. It's about 5 feet tall. And the idea of this is to provide life energy into the atmosphere. It's like an antenna, and the white bucket part is a matrix of polymer resins, aluminum filings, gemstones, and then embedded in that are the 6 copper pipes that are in a hexagonal configuration. And then the red that you see in there are bottles of a alkaline surfactant that uses water to break down oil and toxic materials, with crystals and coils inside the water. So this is the most kind of ridiculous device you can imagine, but I use it. I use them, and it's enhanced my life in a remarkable way. That's one of the tools that I found on a website called educateyourself.org. It's Ken Adachi, and his website is full of all kinds of information about these smart meters, chemtrails, political intrigue, and this kind of stuff.
What was your experience with the orgone generator?
Well,
Did you feel healthier?
I'd say that there's been health effects, but more importantly is the device itself. I built in a panic, and I was fortunate to have a good friend with some money to buy the crystals and the copper and the polymer resins, and then I just sort of followed the instructions and built the thing. It's not my invention. This is Wilhelm Reich technology, and the purpose that I built it for was the chemtrails were so intense in 2004-2005 winter that in Connecticut you could not see from like that's a chemtrail. I could probably load up a good chemtrail sky picture if I had the time. And what differentiates a contrail from a chemtrail is a contrail follows behind an airplane and dissipates very quickly. Those are the ice crystals that form from the exhaust of a jet engine, from the burning of kerosene or jet fuel, which is basically kerosene. And as you can see, these, you can't really see the context of this one, but the persistent contrails or chemtrails don't go away, and frequently they stop and start like they're on a switch. So there was the sky in 2004, like in January, would start out as the nice alpine blue sky, and then by mid-morning the planes would come out and there'd be a tic-tac-toe pattern on the sky of these, almost like skyriders, but it was much more sinister than that. And then these chemtrails would sort of all meld together and fuse together, and you would have this artificial cloud deck, okay? And that would occlude the sun. It was usually kind of a sickly yellow hue to it in some instances. And it was quite alarming. And some of the local people were calling up the newspaper saying, "Hey, what's going on in the sky?" People in the local ski resorts, Catamount, were alarmed to see their beautiful sky get turned into this awful sun occluding artificial cloud deck. So in answer to your question, there was a big storm coming up the coast, the nor'easter coming out of Texas, coming up to Connecticut. This would be the week of March 7th through the 12th. And that's when I built or finished having built my first orgone generator. And what I saw was, as the cloud deck, or what they call the storm shield is what they call it, approaches before any precipitation comes down, it comes into your region, usually associated with a cold front, bumping against a warm front, this kind of a thing. And that, stimulates, puts energy in the atmosphere. And this cloud deck was just chemtrailed beyond imagination. I mean, they were just dumping the stuff into it. And off the top of my house, it was like a Hollywood special effect. It was just this beam of clear, a beam of nothing, shot right through the cloud and into the cloud deck from that little thing, and made a hole so I could actually see blue sky through that artificial cloud deck, and it was ripping it apart. Just ripped this cloud apart. In fact, it ripped the storm apart. And a high pressure ridge developed over southern New England, and half the storm was shot out to sea where it dissipated, and the other half of the storm went up to Maine and dropped 3 inches of snow. It was supposed to drop 6 feet of snow. It was supposed to be a terrible disaster for the state of Maine because they had already many heavy snowfalls preceding this one. So that was my first, a lot of associated phenomena. Sourdough bread, living in my refrigerator for months at a time and not getting moldy. I could root mint and basil. Basil I was never able to root basil, and suddenly it was rooting, willy-nilly, and it still does. It just roots as easy as pie in my house.
Because of this device?
Yeah, that's the only explanation I got.
How about razor blades?
No, I haven't experimented with things like that. When you're dealing with non-particle physics, you're dealing with orgone energy. What the best description that I can give of what I think is going on is that it acts like an antenna, and it draws in toxic energy, or even cosmic energy. And it draws it in from the metal filings that attract these energies, gamma rays, cosmic rays, microwaves, who knows. And then it organizes it with the polymer resins slowing that energy down, because those polymer resins are like tangles of spaghetti. That's in the white bucket part at the bottom. It's like I call it a cosmic capacitor. And then the copper tubes have crystals in them that are wired, that are wound, coiled crystals with copper coils, and that draws that cosmic energy, or whatever energy is being used. If it's toxic, it flips the polarity so that it's non-toxic. And then out through the tops of the pipe, it radiates this, and it seemingly in a very directional manner too. It seems like you can direct it, this life force energy. So it takes this toxic energy, which is deadly, and if you studied Wilhelm Reich, he lays it out for you, where really it comes down to life and death, and life energy is the polar opposite of death energy. So anything that has toxicity about it, say lead, cadmium, arsenic, radioactive materials, are full of deadly orgone, death energy. And anything that is sustaining is filled with living energy, life energy, orgone. And we now are being subjected to devices that are deliberately filling our atmosphere, our workplaces, our homes with very toxic energy, very toxic, invisible, can't, unless you have the tools, you don't taste it, you don't really notice it. Although some of us who are electrosensitive may get headaches, may get dizzy, but tingling, cramps, brain tumors. What are we going to do about it? I'm going out on a limb to share this information with you. But really, just being one person, we have to be many voices and hold our leaders accountable. Was that the last image?
Let's try and see.
Any others? That's a good one, and that's a good one. Those two images, I really want to impress upon you, these are actual photographs that I took. I'm standing on my own work here. This isn't anybody else's. And, this is an object very high up. This is another one. These objects are not airplanes, folks. And what I believe is that most of the time that you see long chemtrails coming out, unless you can see exactly what type of airplane it is, with windows and markings for conventional aircraft, like many of them are, a lot of them that are nondescript, that are not easily identifiable, I believe there's cloaking devices. I believe that they have holographic technology so that we think we see an airplane. And I just happen to be watching the sky enough that I caught a couple of them with their cloaking devices or their holographic devices not functioning.
So this one here is man-made, right?
Well, I mean,
This drone?
they could all be man-made. I'm not saying that I don't know who's made them. But if you look at that and then you look at that, you have two very, very, very different kinds of flying machines here, and that's what we all have to wrestle with is we need to grow up, folks. We need to accept the fact that there is technology being used right now on us that's very advanced. And nobody's telling us. We don't know what it is. We don't know the impacts of it. We don't have any information because they don't give us information. And the last thought about that is that, and that's why I told you about that really scary thought about maybe machines came before animals. Maybe it was machines that created life and that we are now creating more machines. Not that it matters, because this is what we have now. We are in unbelievably interesting times. And when the Chinese would say, "May you live in interesting times," that was a curse, folks. Just so you know. And, I believe we are... excuse me, we are moving very, very fast into some really scary waters. And I don't know what the future brings. I don't know that anybody does, but I think there is a definite agenda for our future. And by the looks of things, it's not pretty.
Nature always has a remedy, right?
Well, there's a remedy for everything. And
Tom Wheeler said the 5G rollout takes the cooperation of local governments so
Yeah.
we can act locally and think globally,
Yeah.
universally.
Yeah. All right, so I guess I'm winding down here.
3 seconds.
And thanks for watching Conant Show. And thank you, Paula Gloria Barton, for teching and piping up a little bit here. And, yep, we're out.